Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to the ACAN Circular Economy Stage 8 event. Before we get started, I'll start with some housekeeping. During the presentations, make sure that you're please muted if you become unmuted. We will be recording for our upload to YouTube, and if you don't want to be recorded, please make sure your camera is off. In case of a Zoom bombing, we will be ending the meeting and sending out a new Zoom link. Okay, so we've started a little bit late, so with no further ado, we're hoping to run for about 90 minutes this evening, and we've split this evening's event into 3 sections. First, we're going to hear from both Daves, Dave Cheshire and David Bennick, aka Deconstruction Dave, and then we're going to have an interactive session with our 6 breakout room leaders, followed by a panel discussion chaired by Duncan Baker Brown. So I guess over to you, Dave.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today for this event. It's excellent. Right, so I just want to talk a little bit about RIBA Stage 8, and I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think I really love this image setting out the perpetual loop and the idea that we need to start thinking about the end of life of the buildings and what happens next. Otherwise, we are just creating a whole load of waste and using loads of resources. And so I think this really sums it up really well. I'm normally we'd probably be talking about lots of nice pictures of buildings and being inspired, but I'm going to start at the other end and say, look, this is what's happening. We've got this brutal process at the end of life of buildings that 40, 50 years old that are getting smashed to pieces, and then having to just smash away at them in a very cheap and efficient way, but really losing all the value of all those resources. And sometimes we're at least devaluing stuff by 1/10 or 100th, even for 1,000th for complex components from what it could be if we'd reclaimed and reused it. And all you're left with is this pile of tangle of metals and plastics and concrete and stuff that you end up downcycling and rather than being able to keep the value of it. And then we've got to go and get a whole load more resources and plunder that from around the world. And doing some research actually very recently found this really interesting case study for a project that was this was just bad luck really. It was only 10 years old, but it was in the way of a large infrastructure project, so they've had to take it down. It was MMC, Modern Methods Construction Approach, and actually the demolition contractor was really caught out by this because they'd assumed that they'd be able to recycle the usual amounts, but actually it's all, as it says there, everything was stuck together, and it was just this sort of big amorphous mass of stuff that they've ended up having to do, nearly all of it having to go to landfill because they couldn't really reclaim it. And you think, well, it's a real shame that it wasn't designed to be unbolted. It could have just actually moved it to another site wholesale and they would have been off and running. So I think this is where we're at, and actually where this stuff ends up. I don't know if anyone's been to a materials recycling facility, but I visited a couple, and it's noisy, smelly, dirty place that where you've got these people, it's semi-mechanical, but they also have people working in there trying to sort out all this waste, and there's this massive cavernous place where they've got just rows and rows of trucks and lorries full of all our waste. This is all from the construction industry coming in here to try and be processed, and of course a lot of it gets put through and to a point where it's sort of downcycled and separated. But then at the end of that huge conveyor belt that's running along, this is the residual waste. This is the stuff they couldn't do anything with, and this will get this goes to a neighboring site where it gets mixed with our black bag waste, which gives it a bit more moisture content and calorific value, and then it's shipped abroad to be burnt as waste. So it's we have to pay for that privilege. So this is what happens, and this is where we're at now. And I think we need to turn that around and look how we could do this differently. This is a bit of an old case, but I really like this one because this is actually an example of a building that this was scheduled for demolition, but the architect and the structural engineer came in and said, look, and when they were pitching for the work, said, I think this could be refurbished and we can create a building here that keeps a lot of the value of the building, and that's what they did, and created this fantastic looking building. Used a fraction of the embodied carbon, because over half of the embodied carbon of a building, a new building, is in the substructure and the structure. So think of how much resource savings they've had. It saved time because they were already out of the ground, and it saved them money as well. So I think this is where things I think we're going to have to go, and I think actually driving it from the design side as well, to say actually we think we can do something with these buildings would be brilliant, and then we're stopping this kind of huge pouring of concrete that is going into all our buildings to create new ones. And we've got a budget now. We've only got so much carbon emissions that we can emit if we're going to get and stop the worst impacts of climate change, and actually half of that is associated with the embodied carbon of building our buildings, and that's in the first couple of years. And we can't just keep doing what we're doing and pouring all this concrete if we're going to do that. We've got to do some things differently. So some of the things that people are doing are obviously looking at reclaiming bits of the building. So can we at least get some of the components back? And Rota DC are doing a great job of that in Brussels, where they've got a big site there, and they've just got tons and tons of bits of buildings. One of the problems, and actually what I was interested when I went there, was that although this is a big scale, it's not that scalable. And they said one of the problems they've got is that where all the precious resources are in the cities and the towns, and of course that's where land value and pressure on land is the highest, and that's where do you keep all this stuff? And they were having to move site because they'd reached the end of their lease period. So one of the problems is that, and I think that's something we need to look at. And I think one of the other interesting ideas I've come across from the research was talking to Elmer, who's here with us today. And sorry, I hope you don't mind me plugging you, Elmer, but this great idea where you've got this building here, which was being taken apart rather than demolished. This concrete building in the back here. The research project that Elmer's working on is actually taking chunks of that building rather than smashing it apart, and then using them as a test to see if we can create the structure for new buildings out of them. And I think what a fantastic idea. And David Bennick, who's on after me, has got some really brilliant ideas about how we can do things very differently as well. And I won't steal his thunder. So really, I think this is, for me, I think this very simple diagram from Danny at the University of Sheffield is just showing where I think the vision could be for how we manage this whole circular economy process at the deconstruction stage, at the end of life and the starting of the new, rather than having to store loads of materials and resources. If we're doing urban mining, so if we're actually using, and imagine this, we've plundered the world's resources and stuck them all into our towns and cities, so they're really concentrated there. We've processed them, we've refined them, we've manufactured them into useful stuff, and then we've got them all sitting there in our buildings. And then what do? We smash it all apart and downcycle it all, and then quite often it goes abroad because we haven't got the ability to process it all in the UK. And it's just seems all wrong. Whereas this idea where actually we could be keeping a log and recording where all the resources are in our urban environments, and doing this urban mining thing, which is a growing trend. And my new version of my book is I've actually put a whole chapter in there about what we're doing about urban mining and where it's all going. And then you don't have to find places to store stuff because it's stored in the buildings. And then actually you can start, if you get that mass going, you've got a big material stock, and then you've got stuff that's going to be released gradually, and then you're working with that. And I think then from the design side, that means that actually, rather than creating new buildings just how we like them, based on the fact that we've got virgin materials, maybe we've got to start thinking about design that is informed by what's available, and actually working with that, and working with the resources and the materials we've got. And I think what's really interesting is part of that is, again, some research done by Atta that I found was actually mapping a few cities in the north of England to find out where the resources actually are. And they've done this work. So this is Bradford, for example. So they've mapped all the bricks in Bradford, and this is just a sample of it. And they've got all the different ages of the bricks, right back for, you know, sort of 100-year-old buildings that we know we can get the bricks back. So let's say, you know, that at some point one of these estates or one of these areas just is going to get demolished, then people can know in advance what the value of those resources are, what the ability to get them back is, and then use again. And I think that's you know, that's the way things are going to have to look in the future. And, you know, just to finish, I think, you know, this is, you know, just one of the many quotes, I think, you know, that buildings are gold mine, they're the valuable materials, and they're just waiting to be harvested. And if we can actually think from the design perspective that, you know, that part of that loop is actually what is next for the buildings that we're designing, but also can we and making sure that we do have an answer to that question, not that it's all going to be smashed to pieces, but also can we get the bits from other places and use that to inspire us to create new designs and save all our resources. That's it. Thank you very much.
Dave, that was amazing. You've actually finished ahead of schedule, so we're incredibly grateful.
Sorry.
No, that's perfect. So now I'm going to introduce our second Dave, Dave Bennick, aka Deconstruction Dave, of the Building Deconstruction Institute, who has trained over 40 states in the USA, helping businesses divert £100 million from landfills, which I converted earlier, and it's just over 45 million kilograms for all of those requiring metric measurements. He focuses on growing the circular economy, zero waste energy movements, embodied carbon, and sustainable building. So over to you, Deconstruction Dave.
Great, thank you. Just want to make sure you can see the screen. Thumbs up if we can see it. Yeah, so I'm Dave Bennick. I'm from the Seattle area, and yeah, I've been doing this. This is my 29th year of saving these materials. So, like you said, 100 million pounds. What does that look like? I don't really know. It's such a massive amount, but I do know that when you convert the reclaimed wood that we've saved, it's equivalent to 10,000 acres of standing forest, and that helps people understand a little bit better. So. Lots of projects, we've created lots of green collar jobs. We've worked all over North America, and we've started quite a few reuse operations that, you know, or consulted on them. But why are we doing this, right? Why are we doing this? So one of the things that I do to help people understand is that I try to, throughout this talk, I'm going to be using examples that are relatively simple. We're not going to be talking about large structures that we take down and things like that. We're going to keep it simple because we don't have a lot of time. But here's what the EPA says. They say that we, as Americans, we waste about 4.4 pounds of materials a day. Now that's older numbers, but we're going to use it. If you add that up over your whole lifespan, though, that's over 120,000 pounds of materials that you would waste. And when I saw that number, I recognized it because the average home that we're taking apart weighs about 120,000 pounds. Therefore, if you relate the two, you see that demolition of one American home is equivalent to your entire lifetime's worth of waste. So you could waste a lifetime allotment of waste all in one day if you choose to demolish. And when we share that idea with people, it really helps them grasp the impact of their choice of how they remove a building. So what are we saving? I mean, apparently we're saving bathtubs, but we do save a lot of wood. We save a lot of metal. We save a lot of concrete and other materials. And, you know, the main point is that we're trying to save everything, frankly. But what we're really saving in our eyes are the most sustainable materials in the world, because all of the impacts of those materials have already been paid for or already been accounted for. And the fact that we so easily demolish them and throw them away, and then we seek out other sustainable materials. It's like we're ignoring the fact that you have these sustainable materials, and then we're looking for a sustainable alternative when there was one right in front of you. I'm just going to say that sometimes I'll use the word salvage. Salvage to us is surface items, things like doors and flooring and cabinets and that. And there are companies that only do that. But then there are deconstruction companies, and where we take the entire structure down and perhaps to the ground if that's what's needed. And so I'm going to say one more thing about that. You know, it's very difficult, as you might guess. It's physically difficult, and it's also difficult to compete with demolition. Like Dave said, it's very quick and efficient to demolish a building. In our case, we take more time, but we have challenges that they don't have. We're trying to save things or trying to destroy things. So what we did is we started to look at other ways of taking the buildings apart. And I'm going to give you this as an example. There's a wall section. Remember, I'm just using simple examples. So this is a wall section. It's framed with 2x6s and typical framing for North America. The thing is that I was taking this wall apart, and I was processing all of the parts. I was pulling nails. I was recycling short pieces. I was throwing away materials that couldn't be saved. And then I was selling the reusable material to someone, and guess what? They built a wall out of what remained. And so I realized that I'm taking a wall apart so they can build a wall. Why don't I just sell them the wall? And so we started selling assemblies instead of just components of a building. And so we evolved, and we became more efficient. It became easier to take buildings in faster, and we became more competitive with demolition. And that helped us grow. And then we realized, you know, now we've sold these, we started selling these packages of walls and floors and things like that you could make a small building out of. In fact, we've created 100 structure packages, you know, where someone will buy, they want to have a storage shed, so they'll buy a package of materials, and they'll come pick that up, and now they go back home and create a structure. Here's one of the structures that more advanced, where this old barn was panelized and labeled, and it disassembled and then reassembled 250 kilometers away. So it now is being reassembled. Is going to look exactly the same without any waste without any real waste as part of that process. Our next step is to do what we call modular deconstruction, and we have completed probably 6 or 7 of these now. Maybe it's more. It's been such a long time. And if you look at the red box there, you see that if you were to just focus on that part of the structure, it almost looks like a small structure, doesn't it? It has walls, it has a floor, it has a roof. 3 of those walls are exterior walls, so you're almost there. And so our plan is to save more of these modules, where we're actually saving an entire room of a building that we can move down the road, and we can do it affordably. And we'll use the other parts of the building as spare parts to repair the 4th wall. So here's a comparison. You know, when we deconstruct, I have to admit, you know, a lot of the buildings, they're not meant to be taken apart. The materials that were used were not meant to be saved. In some cases, they weren't even meant to be recycled, or they didn't care if they were recycled or reused. So typically, we might only reuse 45% of a structure, recycle 45%, and then dispose of the rest. But when someone was to think that process through, perhaps someone on this meeting today, and design the building to be disassembled, then you might see the results change. And in our case, we have seen this numerous times, where the reuse percentage skyrockets to 96%, and there's very little waste or recycling. And so we actually end up averaging about 98% landfill diversion from those projects. But other buildings, you know, we say they're not designed to be disassembled, they're designed for demolition. They use lots of construction adhesive, they spray foam, you know, they use spray foam insulation. Both of those things are easy to apply, but they're not, it's essentially impossible to remove. So what does that mean? Well, and then also because of mechanical means of fastening things now, they're using a lot more fasteners than they used to, because now you don't have to do it by hand. And these are challenges that we face. They make a job that's already really hard, and they make it even harder. So the ironic thing is that when we're saving a wall intact or a floor intact, and it has spray foam and construction adhesive, it actually makes that easier to save, because it helps it hold together. It stays more rigid. And it's one of the reasons that we started doing this process, is because we realized that we cannot stop, we cannot fail. We must move forward. It doesn't matter what the architect or the designer or the contractor did, we have to adjust and adapt to that situation. And so what we were calling our post-fab panels is an adaptation to those challenges. Okay, well, here's a building that was easy, you know, I thought of it as being designed for disassembly. They may not have thought of that when they engineered it, built it. But what is an architect? What is your role in deconstruction? Well, if this was your structure and you chose, you know, screws instead of nails, or you bolted things together instead of welding them, like they did here, then that made my job easier. That made me more competitive. That made the demolition bid look less desirable. And we beat out the demolition contractor for this project. And this building was saved and is now reassembled as a community building in some other city. So thank you to that designer. Another thing about what is your role as an architect? Well, one of the things that we struggle with is the processing. We might be able to get a building taken apart, but we still have to process those materials. So here we are denailing flooring, and you can see there are thousands of nails laying around, because that's how many nails were used to fasten the floor down. So, but recently, you know, we found that exterior decking they're using these hidden fasteners, which are really clips, and they don't damage the material, they don't damage the decking, and they're easy to remove. And so these hidden fasteners that they're using are probably, hopefully, the first step to making it easier for us to disassemble, and while also protecting the material quality and value. So as I said, it's going to make it easier to disassemble. If you built it in assemblies, then we could save it in assemblies. That would be great. Like we see things being more and more prefab construction. Well, if those prefab panels could be removed as they were, then they could be reused. Remember, whenever you save us time and cost, then you make us more competitive, and you make we get a larger percentage of the market share, and so on. So as far as the specifying reclaimed materials, that's always an issue. We're not going to solve those issues today, perhaps, but I think that it's good to think about starting somewhere. And here's a project where there was this was on an island, and there was a stand of cedar trees, and they cut those trees down, and they used those trees to build a cabin. They milled them on site, and they built a cabin out of them. And when that property was purchased by someone else, they were going to remove the cabin. So we disassembled it and we actually remilled the lumber into paneling and placed it in this home. So if you follow that, you realize that the cedar trees that were growing there are still there in the form of that paneling. They actually never left. They never left the job site. And when you're working on an island, you might think of ideas like this, but it doesn't mean it can't be applied elsewhere. And remember, we've studied the comparison of new materials versus reclaimed. And one of the studies we participated in, it showed that reclaiming the materials, actually, the process of reclaiming it took 11 to 13 times less energy than producing it new. And it generated 3 to 5 times less greenhouse gas emissions. And it didn't cut any trees down. So where are we heading? We actually keep evolving. We're trying to not be a reuse store anymore, but a reuse center where we co-locate various businesses that are synergistic. Some of them generate material, some of them use material and create products out of the material. And so the Reuse Innovation Center is a place where we're trying to start these all over North America now. And the idea is that there's a repair center to repair some of these materials that might have some damage. There's a recycling center as well, but there's a retail facility, and it's all of these things at once. It's amazing. So one of the things that it's going to be adapted for are these large panels that I talk about. We also want to continue to work on our products like reclaimed content CLT, and we also want it to be, to continue to work on what we call our wish list, which is where architects will enter what they're looking for before they need those items, and then we can go out and try and find those items, or as many as we can ahead of time. So almost done here. I think if I had a lesson for anyone, it's don't wait, start today. Don't wait for you to figure out all of these things. Start somewhere, like try and source the materials, look at the buildings that you're removing. And I think we'll slowly get there. If you use Portland, Oregon, now Portland, Oregon actually created an ordinance that it outlawed demolition of certain structures. And the idea was that they were trying to provide all kinds of community benefits that demolition had the opposite effect of. So, but we were able to do that. I've worked in Portland, Oregon for probably 6 years now, trying to get that to work, and it is working. We have a whole infrastructure of reuse businesses. Some of them take buildings down, some of them want materials. We're going beyond the ordinance now. We're taking down buildings like the one you see there that isn't required to deconstruct, but the contractors are now strong enough that they can go out and bid on other projects. So they're taking down hundreds of buildings a year in the Portland area now. And that's because they started somewhere. So I like this statement I came up with, where I think that we're distracted by today's problems and it leaves us precious time to solve tomorrow's problems. And the reason I mention that is because as an architect, you have so many things to worry about and so many concerns. And I think that if we can just take a small step, we can create a foothold and then continue to move our industry forward into more complex projects than that. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much. I think it's a nice reminder to us architects and built environment professionals that we often don't think about the exact way that these are going to be deconstructed. Okay, so we're now on to the second section of this evening's meeting, and we're all going to go into breakout rooms for 20 minutes, after which we'll return to the main session for panel discussion. This is a really amazing opportunity to get nice and close with some of the previous speakers. We also have a bonus speaker, Jenny Kerrigan, who's also joining us. So the breakout rooms are on a selection of key themes that have turned up in the series, so that it will be a bit of a roundup as well. You'll be randomly allocated into the breakout rooms, and each breakout room will have a breakout room leader, which is someone who's previously spoken at the sessions, and an ACAN facilitator. You'll notice that all of the ACAN facilitators have a coloured background, and we're about to share a link to a collaborative Miro board. So once you get into the Miro board, if you could navigate to the breakout room that you're in, which is also matched to your ACAN facilitator's colour. So we've tried to colour coordinate it for ease. And then each of the breakout room leaders will be leading the session, and there'll be a chance to feed back to the main session during the panel discussion. So I'm going to do a quick roundup of exactly what the breakout rooms are before we all get placed into them. So for breakout room 1, we have Richard Boyd from Arup, and he'll be running the pitch, circular persuasion. Breakout room 2 is urban mining, sourcing and circularity, which Gilly Hobbs is leading. Breakout room 3 is reversible buildings, designing for circularity, which is Elmer Dermeszik from 4D Architects. Breakout room 4 is circular logistics with Pablo van de Bosch from Modesta. Breakout room 5, applying circular strategies for old and new buildings with Dave Cheshire, who we've just seen. And then breakout room 6 is the circular mindset, shifting ownership with Jerry Kerrigan from Archetype. So if our Zoom production team could assign us to breakout rooms, we'll see you back in the main room at 7:30, I think. Perfect. Welcome back, everyone. Alma's in the room. We're just going to jump straight in. Go for it. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this this event. I have got my own specific order that I want people to come back to me in. So could we please start with room 6, circular mindset. Jenny, could you give us 1 minute to summarize your discussion, please?
Sorry, unmute myself. That's a pound in the charity box. We talked a lot about kind of around various questions. So we've got, how do we shift that kind of private ownership mindset to a more stewardship, reuse mindset? What persuades people to take responsibility? How do we foster behavioral changes? The kind of challenges of being a pioneer, and how do we measure success in a way? So some of the key points that came out of that were having a system in place that enables people to do this in a new way. So when you get new materials, you get guidelines for their application and use, they're certified and warranted. We need a similar system in place that makes it easy for people to reuse demolition materials or deconstructed materials. We really need to be able to communicate the benefits in a way that reaches our target audience. What are people's incentives and motivations? And that might be completely different for a private developer of housing who's just going to sell it on, to a social housing person who's going to, has to have this building for its whole life cycle. So it's in their best interest to do things differently. We talked about creating a language of universally accepted vocab so that people are able to understand what each other are talking about, and definitions. And one of the other aspects we talked about was collaboration. So it's not just about a designer proposing something and then hoping that it will be carried out. It's about working with every aspect of the team, so the clients, the contractor, the suppliers, so that we can all collectively come up with something that works for everybody. And the final point was about education and kind of upskilling and knowledge sharing. It's really important to do that so that every party feels they can take ownership and responsibility.
Thank you for that, Jenny. I'd like Richard Boyd to speak next, please. The pitch, circular persuasion, please.
Super, thanks, Duncan, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for room 1 for your contributions and our discussion. It was really interesting. Just wanted to pick up a few things that we talked about. The first one was the built environment doesn't just waste materials, it wastes space as well. And a key part to making the business case to the investors and the clients is to sort of suggest to them how that space is being wasted and how a change to the architecture to be more flexible, to be more deconstructible, to be more adaptable actually helps insure them against market changes, helps them realize more value from the building because it's sort of got value to a greater range of stakeholders. So sort of trying to get upstream and sort of make that pitch to them in language that they understand around space and rents and retail and that kind of stuff is really, really important. We also talked about longevity. So is the solution to design your building for as long as possible? And in sort of domestic residential markets, maybe some of the more contemporary sort of domestic scale 2-up 2-down houses that we've built recently aren't quite built to the same longevity standards or flexibility standards that they were previously. And is there something we can learn from that? At the same time, outside of domestic housing, you have this challenge of sort of, is it a pyramid or a porta cabin? Does it last thousands of years, or do you design it for a single function and it constantly changes? You know, getting that sense of time in your mind set from the beginning is really important. We talked about ownership models. So some ownership models might sort of, again, help us make that case for longevity or perpetual use, as opposed to the more speculative development models, which kind of are necessarily short term. And is there some lever or process that we can put in place to either crowd out the speculative because it's negative and it's detracting value, in favor of some of the ownership models that might last a little bit longer on shared ownership and those kind of things. And finally, yeah, does we spend a lot of time, money and effort designing new things while we are chucking the old things away? And as part of the business case going to come from sort of explaining to clients, you don't have to design this again. You don't have to start from a blank sheet of paper for a brand new building. If you take an approach that is sort of reuse first, retain first, refurbish first, you are, as David said earlier, you're out of the ground quicker, you spend less time in design, you spend less time in construction, and you save a lot of money or create a lot of value in that way as well. So there's just some of the topics that we touched on. There are plenty others, but I'm not sure if I have.
I saw it was a busy mirror board. Okay, thank you for that, Richard. Pablo, could you sum up what your discussion was about, please?
It's impossible, Duncan, for the simple reason because everybody wanted to contribute. And I had to manage both people that came up with brilliant ideas and writing them down on a Miro board. So I'm just a human being, but trying to do something. What I really liked is about the word around engagement, making sure we were talking about the logistics, making sure that the full supply chain is engaged. From the developer, the manufacturer, the designer, but also the manufacturer. They need to be aware of the big task that we have to change our logistics from take, make, waste to take, make, use, reuse, reuse, reuse. That is a big challenge, and everybody needs to be aware of that and needs to be engaged in thinking about tools and solutions and changes in the way how we work. And yes, we need regulation with that. That's one of the things that determines our logistical process. Regulation around carbon, regulation about keeping busy locally. So do not take stuff, move it around the world, but reuse it locally. And also stimulate reuse and make sure that if people only use virgin materials because it's cheaper or easier, that they are properly penalized. And then a nice one that I do like is make sure that we know what we use and what we apply in our built environment. So where do we have what? Make sure that it's properly registered, that we can do analysis on what materials are available, and that transparency is created to stimulate reuse. There's a lot more, but
yeah, well, when I was in there, you were dwelling on transparency and what is where. So I think that's more we could talk about in a minute. Elmer, in room 3, reversible buildings designing for circularity. We have your summary, please?
Yeah, so that's not easy because I think time went very fast, so I'm not very good with that. That's my problem. Yeah, we did talk about, and actually I just made a short recap on the guidelines and protocols for design of circular buildings, which are there. A lot has been done through a number of European projects, and European Commission has published also some guidelines and so forth. The fact that there is everyone is aware of the need to start designing circular buildings, new types of buildings. But the question that we talked about was mainly on, so what do we need as architects, and what is stopping us from designing these buildings that we all think that have to come and start appear rather sooner than later. So there are, of course, all immediately examples of clients having nice ambitions and ideas about the buildings, even having a nice circular ambitions. But then when you come to costs, everything falls down, or even designing a building for certain competition. And as a circular building, when the competition is over, then everyone goes back to business as usual. So that is something that obviously architects are dealing with. So there you might have some tools to design, have some protocols which you can pick up to start thinking differently. But obviously we need new business models. And as we heard from other sessions, explaining users and owners of the buildings what is the future value of the buildings if they are designed differently, with additional values on multiple user space, for example, flexibility and modularity of systems and so forth. So obviously in the end, we came up with the conclusions that probably policy is something, and I heard that from other colleagues, policy and regulations would help to set up new standards for circular building and design of circular buildings, prescribing maybe some reversibility index for building as a building standard, and some policies that will actually bring some balance in market conditions today, because market conditions today does not support circular buildings. That's what we see in the Netherlands from a number of circular building projects, which are mainly experimental, and they cost 2 to 3 times more than a linear project. So our conclusion is that the subject is quite interesting, but very complex, and architects cannot solve it by themselves. So some other policymakers should also step up.
Thank you for that. Jilly in the room 2, urban mining.
Hi. Yeah, so thanks everybody for your inputs. So I was very keen to sort of hear about what's been going on practically, and if people have any sort of examples of where they've tried to implement urban mining, so particularly using reclaimed products and materials from existing built environment into projects, for example. So there are some examples. I mean, unfortunately, they tend to be quite in the area of research. So we heard from the Circuit project where reclaimed timber is being used to create glulam products. And again, you know, there was some quite significant barriers that came up. So being able to get hold of the materials, to being able to do the certification, those issues in terms of environmental permitting, for example. So I think the general conclusion is it's just not that straightforward to be able to take reclaimed products and materials from the existing built environment and then put them into new products or new systems. And it's that sort of time and cost element of being able to work out the best way of doing that is really important to factor in. And we talked a bit about pre-demolition audits, pre-refurbishment audits, being able to provide some of that information. But we also heard from examples from site where actually it's very difficult to potentially convince developers to use reclaimed products and materials because you don't necessarily have the assurance of quality. There's availability issues, for example. And it's just so easy to get new stuff. I think that's the key thing. So how do you sort of build the business case almost to be able to do reuse and recycling? And I think it's one of the really key things that came out is just trying to do these, just trying to make it a reality. We learn so much. So these sort of hands-on, doesn't have to be a massive project, but just trying to actually do urban mining, to do the reclamation back into either new products and systems or new buildings is really valuable, because I think particularly for the design community, when you're trying to do that, then I think you then see very, very clearly some of the issues in terms of designing for future reuse, for adaptability, because you're faced with it on site by trying to get your hands dirty to get this stuff out and be able to use it again. So I think that came up very clearly as well. The world of BIM, so hopefully in the future it will be easier to get the relevant information to support quality recertification. But it really depends on the level of information. So somebody said, you know, it's really information in, information out. So if you put the right information in, you'll get the right information out. But then you've also got this big block of time in between where you need to make sure that information is available. And we talked a little bit about, you know, having some information publicly available so that you're not, you know, you're not then so dependent upon data and documentation being transferred, because it's actually in the public domain.
Thank you, Gilly. And finally, David, we'll end up where we started, as it were. David, please come back. And just for the record, I feel like we're ahead of time, aren't we? But anyway, that's just the thing. So David, waffle on for as long as you want.
I got to say, I could feel that, no problem. I don't think we are. Oh yeah, brilliant. Thanks for the great discussion in our team. It was really good. There was loads of stuff we talked about, but we tried to sort of boil it down in the end to just a few things that we thought we could actions for ACAN really. And I thought one which came out was this idea of actually there's lots of sort of related campaigns going along around you know, do we set targets on embodied carbon and legislate on that, or push it anyway through policy? What about permitted development rights, and do we try and stop people, you know, demolishing so much, and then fixing the VAT or refurbishment, which I know is part of the AJ campaign, but actually saying that can we try to make a compelling argument and wrap all those up together and push those to the policymakers. And related to that, I know something that when I was speaking to Will Hurst at AJ, she just lives just around the corner from me, he was saying that actually that the government hasn't really got a single port of call for the construction industry. You know, you can either go to the RIBA or you go to Specity or you go to, you know, RICS or wherever. So it doesn't have a single sort of voice. And I think that's something that I thought was a really interesting mindset as well. And then just a couple of other things I thought was a really good one was around a way to evidence and create an evidence base for the benefits of refurbishment. So I mean, and this just happened to me yesterday when I got approached by a client saying, "No, I just refurbished this building. What's the carbon benefit? You know, how do I demonstrate how good this is?" And actually, I think that's something that we could be doing. Someone's just asked, "Isn't that what the Construction Leadership Council is for?" I'm sure it is, but I've never heard of them. I'm embarrassed to say, or maybe I shouldn't be. But yeah, there's lots of such bodies around, all trying to do these things. And I suppose lastly, just this idea of RIBA Stage 0, and actually, you know, how do we influence that? Because that's when the big decisions are made about, you know, what plot of land do we buy, and if it's got a building on it, can we demolish it and build a taller one or whatever? And actually, architects aren't, you know, our team was saying that not involved at that stage. So how do we actually get that message out that actually these are important decisions that need to be made right at that client feasibility stage, even before the design team involved? That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. I mean, it's strange. I feel like giving you a round of applause, everybody. That there's such a lot of energy in these virtual rooms, and I'm just looking at two different computers with feedback from the Miro board, etc. So it's exciting times for the world of the circular economy. I think there's a lot of people having a go, and I think we've really got to be clear about the definitions and what we need to enable it. Is it correct now, ACAN people, that we're going to have the panel discussion? That's what I've got on my timetable now. So if someone could give me a bit of a steer with that. Is that where we are now? Are we happy to lead straight into that? Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Okay, so what I'd like to do actually is to ask all of you. I mean, we've only got about 10 minutes on this, but all of the team leaders, the room coordinators are going to be in this chat. And Dave Cheshire referred to something that we could give ACAN as a sort of action point. And I think that might be a good starting point for everybody, because from my point of view, ACAN have done a thoroughly wonderful job raising awareness of the circular economy in the built environment over the last 4 or 5 months. Huge attendances at these Zoom events, and lots of impact as far as I can see it. It's an amazing job. You're good at getting people together and getting the right people to talk. So from that point of view, Richard Boyd from ARA, one proposed, I mean, how do you think ACAN can take this forward? What would you do with all this, not just the information on the Miro boards at the moment, but all this discussion and thought at the moment? It's really moved things forward as far as I can see, but there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I've been slightly tongue-in-cheek and rude in the chat about pan-industry bodies and construction leadership councils and construction industry councils and that kind of stuff. But I think that the challenge or the next step for me is to sort of, I was talking about what happens at stage 0, or even what happens before that, before the architects are anywhere near it, where, you know, huge influence can be had. And so I think sort of taking this energy and trying to, you know, reach out and engage with the other groups in the built environment who influence these decisions, to sort of spread your enthusiasm to them and make sure that they're aware of how much energy and enthusiasm and interest there is in this, I think would be a really positive next step to go.
Okay, Gilly, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said in the wrap up, I think it's just really important that people start doing some of this stuff and learning by doing. And I suppose maybe one of the things that could be a really useful thing to do would be to be able to have a way of capturing that learning somehow, you know, almost creating a network of people who are actually practically trying to do this in reality, and then they can learn from each other, they can help each other, you know, mentoring, that kind of thing, resolving problems together, you know, being creative together. And I think that would be a really useful forward activity, because you can build a network of people that are trying to do this stuff in reality, and then they can help each other. When it's always easier, you know, if you've got a group of people, like-minded people, you can chat about maybe some of the issues you're facing, and somebody else may have resolved that issue, or you could maybe club together and try and
that sort of exchange of knowledge is a big deal, isn't it? Could I ask Pablo, I mean, with the Madasta Foundation, the sort of work you're doing at a high level, with sort of macro and micro, I would say, how does it compare in the Netherlands to the UK at the moment? I mean, it feels like in the UK to me that there's a lot of people very interested in it, and 1 or 2 people doing it.
Well, the good thing is, first of all, compliments to ACAN and this initiative, indeed, to create awareness. I think one of the interesting differences between what's happening in the Netherlands versus the UK is in the Netherlands, it turned out that there is a cross-sectoral approach towards circularity. So we see banks, investors, constructors, manufacturers, they all have the awareness that they need to change, and these groups actually talk to each other. It's not brilliant, because people like to talk, architects like to talk to architects, and bankers like to talk to bankers. But I think that is that would be one of the great things to ensure that we get a dialogue between the different sectors. The construction sector has got a huge supply chain of many actors. It's a very big sector, and we need to cross the borders of our own professionality. Because when we talk about the way how we construct or design, the investor thinks, I don't care how you design or construct, as long as I can make my money. And the regulator thinks, as long as I cannot be sued because I had wrong regulation that leads to a negative impact. So I think that we need to establish these cross-sectoral communications. And that is something that I do see starting off in the Netherlands. And I think that with what ACAN has been doing so far, it is fantastic to try to extend that network also with people that are a bit less familiar.
Thank you for that. I've got some questions from the floor. I've got, oh, hello. That was a bit of I got a delay then. Colin Rose, a question for Deconstruction Dave. You mentioned CLT with reclaimed content. Have you started fabricating? This is something we've been working on at the University College London in partnership with Ramboll, and instigated the circuit product on glulam that Julie was mentioning. Great to see more activity in this area. So yes, have you had success with that?
Yeah, well, one of the ideas was to, we're always trying to find new uses for reclaimed wood. We don't seem to have any trouble selling it, so it's not something that we have invested a lot of time in, but a place called Vaughan Timbers is a CLT manufacturer, and they focused on creating several panels, I think, that had reclaimed content, and then they were Rafael Alvarez was testing those, stress testing them and things like that to see how it turned out, and it was pretty favorable, but of the processing and things like that were, to get all the nails out and everything, that was a factor. But I think that, the idea of our Reuse Innovation Center is so that we can incubate these ideas. And so my role is more of creating these centers so that these ideas can be forwarded, instead of someone just thinking of it and being on their own and having trouble getting funding or whatever. We want to move forward. That's our goal. Isn't just to save the material, but save the material that we're not currently saving, and finding more uses and creating new products.
And Dave, how have you found sort of legislation, national or local, regional law enabled or hindered the way you practice? Because it looks pretty unique to me, the way you're going about things.
Well, one of the things that, the structures, a lot of the structures that we have created are under 200 square feet. And there's a cutoff for a lot of communities where smaller buildings aren't subject to the same energy codes or the same permitting requirements as larger structures. And it's something where we could start. Remember, I said you need to start somewhere. And so we chose to start somewhere where we could save hundreds and hundreds of buildings and not thousands of buildings. So, and so we're slowly progressing, but we are seeing the government make strides towards allowing reusable lumber. And so Washington State, I think Oregon, now have legislation in place that allows for reclaimed lumber. And we have in fact, we have a lumber inspection bureau on the West Coast of the United States that is willing to recertify reclaimed wood so that it can be used in new applications. So there's progress being made.
Yeah. Okay, Peter Swallow, you work for Grimshaw's. I was wondering if you work for a large practice at an international level. Do you see different parts of the world being more amenable to the idea of the circular economy than others? Have you got this sort of overview?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I definitely see differences between the regions that we work in. I think some areas they get hindered by legislative barriers. Other areas there's more scope to be able to experiment and be able to work with authorities to be able to circumvent those through research projects and through Pathfinder projects. So we have seen that. I think one of the things that we've also realized is not to overthink things. Sometimes you can take a proposition, say for Design For Deconstruction, and you can take it in its thinking to the nth degree, and it can put off contractors, and you can see premiums attached with some of the ideas. I think that's something that you really have to be careful of. Sometimes overthinking things can derail them. So DFD can certainly be done well without having to implement brand new technologies.
I think that's a really good point. At one level, you're trying to tell the world that there's innovation in your project, but another point, you don't want to scare the contractors off.
Absolutely.
I mean, Jenny, you're working for Archetype. That's the world you're in all the time. I don't mean the world of scaring contractors, but the world of innovation. Well, I'm scaring a bit of contractors.
Sometimes.
I mean, from your point of view, working for a practice that's got such a long established track record of having to go in this world, what do you think the challenges are or the opportunities are here? you're right now on May the 19th, 2021. I mean, it's good times, isn't it?
It is good times. And I think there's a lot happening in the world right now, which is causing consumers to rethink things. So COVID has just completely changed our perspective about how we commute and travel and work, and what kind of built environment we want for that. And Brexit has, in the UK, certainly changed people's perspectives about where they source their materials from, because suddenly sourcing from Europe, who knew, it's become complicated and expensive. Why didn't they think that through before? So people are suddenly looking to home. And we've had recently lots of very public climate strikes and the kind of Greta effect, and consumers are now demanding more. And so it's our responsibility to respond. So it's a great time to be doing this. And archetypes come from a place where it's been kind of, in its early days, dismissed as being this slightly green and hippie, hairy, niche. Sustainability is that thing that you do extra if you're that kind of person. But now we've suddenly found ourselves at the forefront of an industry that is having to change, and with a massive wealth of expertise. And we can't, we're totally invested in knowledge sharing and upskilling, because that is, vital to that. And I think, as Pablo is referring to, that whole aspect of it being a collaboration, it's not just about the designer saying, we're going to specify this and say this and you can do this, because unless the client can buy into that and see the benefits and see some evidence about how that's improved things on other projects, unless the developer can see where their investment is going, unless the contractor can kind of understand, how is this going to be actually straightforward for me to build, and how am I going to deal with these weird materials that you've suddenly told me I've got to use? Unless everyone works together as a team, that's where we've seen the biggest success, is where a team has sat down and worked together from stage 0 to stage 8, and then looped it back round, not just kept it as a kind of record at the end of, okay, this didn't work, this did work, okay, we'll try better next time.
I'm going to ask Elmer a question. When I popped into your room 3, you appeared a bit. Well, you were talking about the need for people to consider the future value of buildings, the buildings we designed, and I just got the sense that you were feeling a bit negative about the situation at the moment. Because where do you think we are? Because I've seen you present a number of times, and your work is really inspirational, really clear, and I love the sort of Revit bolt-on software that you're looking at, that sort of really maps the potential of the building to provide you with material. But are you feeling optimistic at the moment, or did I pick up a bit of pessimism? Oh, you're on mute. Still on mute. Elmer, you're on mute. I can't.
Yes,
we can't
sorry.
hear.
Yes, so I'm always optimistic, but I don't see things happening fast enough. And I have discussions with all stakeholders, from the construction companies, policymakers, architects, engineers. And I did set up many new initiatives, platforms, trying to speed up things. So my general understanding is, okay, yes, we all do understand now that there is urgency, but somehow we are stuck at the moment in the discussion on how we really organize and define the business case to move forward into this new circular world. That's, yeah, that I see that as a big barrier, and not much is happening on that level. I mean, everyone is looking at someone else, like, you should start first. Do you make your step, make a step first, as in the construction industry, or as a deconstruction industry, or architecture design better, or whatever. So that's why, anyway, definitely we do have to, as a designers, I was talking primarily, like, when we design from architectural point of view, when we design new buildings, we really have to think of, while designing, what is the future value of this building after 20 or 30 years? How do I take care that this building I designed today is not going to end up as in a degradation phase, as a base for the construction roads and so forth? How do I take care as a designer that there is value in a building on whether it's on a building level, so it can be reused as an office or a housing, or in a components I design and put together. So that's the minimum that the designer can do. But I also see, and I talk with many policymakers a lot, and I think that really on the regulation side, standardization needs to be defined. We need to standardize the quality of circular building. What do we really mean by circular building? We really have to come up with a strong statement there.
Yeah.
And we also need to think about taxation policies, because at the moment, the market conditions are not supporting circular building design, circular buildings. We've seen that thousands of times. So everyone talks about circular building, but market condition today is not supporting it. So we have to change the market conditions, taxation policies, labor taxation. I mean, there are thousands of things. And I've written a couple of journals on that as well. So yeah, you saw it correctly. I'm optimistic, but things are happening too slow from my point of view.
I think in the chat, Richard, do you just want to say what you said in the chat, please?
All right. Yeah, no, I think I was reinforcing and backing up and echoing what Elma described in terms of, we spoke to lots of people as part of a big stakeholder engagement we did across Europe with value chain members, from investors all the way through the deconstruction demolition sector. And everyone said, yeah, circular economy, great. We have a role, everyone has a role, but we want someone else to act first. And so we picked on the investors and the clients to say, you define what good looks like at the beginning of the project, and you set the inception, you set it up. So you are best placed to take the first step, and everyone will respond to you. Which is why we then sort of went to focus on making the case to them as to why they should take that first step.
But Richard, you've had recent successes with your clients, haven't you? I mean, you've got the hardest nosed property developers and landowners considering the circular economy and reuse, haven't you?
Yeah, I think for those sort of like lighthouse projects, the carbon story also helped. So, One Triton Square with British Land, we chose to, the building was not old, which helped. It was a 20-year-old building that was retained, and the floor area was doubled, but we took parts of the facade off, refurbished them, put them back on. We retained a lot of the facade, we retained a lot of the structure, and that came in with a carbon footprint sort of half of the benchmarks in terms of the embodied emissions, because we retained so much. And the Grosvenor work we've been doing, they're very explicitly going out there to say we need to, in order for us to hit our net zero carbon targets, in order for us to work with our supply chain to reduce our scope 3 footprint, we have to start reusing materials. So kind of for those two leading clients, they've come at it from that sort of carbon question, and circular and reuse is seen as the one part of the solution to that decarbonization.
And that's your way in. I mean, they're beginning to understand the whole life carbon question, I think, and the benefits of it. I think if you use that language, people seem to get it. Dave, Cheshire, I wouldn't mind you I think we've got to wrap up now. We were asked to think of one idea that would enable the circular economy and an action point for ACAN. I wondered if you wanted to reflect on those 2 points. Yeah.
Well, I thought the 2 points we talked about was the coordinating the campaigns and trying to get all of these different ideas and push them together. And I thought the other one was interesting. It was that idea of creating the evidence base and and the stories around it. I think we've got to get some good stories out there. That's the things that people remember, that they relate. Like I think One Triton Square is just a brilliant story to be telling people, and I think those are the sort of things that people remember and get inspired by.
Okay, so a couple of points raised in the chat. Actually, one's from Deconstruction. Dave, do you want to make it yourself? We in the reuse industry.
One of the things that we look at is that there's this countdown of we're all kind of watching this clock and it's slowly evolving disaster, and then climate change and things like that. And I look at it as everything that we're doing is an effort to give us more time, to extend that clock. And so we're doing everything we can, and we're trying to build our industry and I don't think I had a question as much as just a comment that every time that we're battling to make this work, we're trying so hard. And every time even a single structure, purchasing a single item, you make it easier for us to extend, and we're kind of on the precipice of making this work on a larger scale. And I think that's something that there are a lot of good reasons this should work. There are a lot of reasons it's not working at the level we'd like it to be, but I'm excited to see all of you in this room joining this effort. It's amazing.
I want to just, there's some comments from the floor. Janine says, if there was one thing the supply chain could do, I would say setting up a take back scheme. That would be the thing. And then another comment, the main concern on reusing materials is their integrity. Is there anything in place to ensure that the environmental product declarations are as standard procedure as cost sheets? Has anybody got an answer to that? It looks like Jenny has.
Yeah, just those two questions really struck with me, because recently I've been doing some work with City of Edinburgh Council looking at material specification and sourcing and furnishings for new schools in their area. And they've been really forward thinking in framing their requirements. So they've looked at their kind of materials and health and well-being and energy consumption. They've got sky high energy bills for their learning estate, and they've just said, right, we're going to do something about this. So I've been looking into, can I easily find EPDs? What are the schemes for? I've been looking at those kind of background bits to material sourcing. So not just is it a sustainable product, but what is their sustainable process? And in some manufacturers are great with this. So for example, Interface Carpets, Nora Rubber, Forbo, they very clearly set out all of this on their website. And if you've got a little bit of time, you can kind of navigate, you can find environmental product declarations, although the language of them is quite dense. And so even as someone who's in the industry, I find some of the material very hard to understand. So I think kind of simplifying and making that language more accessible to people is part of it. Making it clearly available. Every website you go to for a product lodges it in a slightly different way. Some of them have it in their technical kind of index and it's easy to find. Others kind of hide them. As Rich has pointed out, there are some databases that you can go to that's starting to pull all this together and make it more accessible, which is great. And I think that's one of the ways of trying to pull that all together. But also I think, looking at people's processes, what do they do? Some manufacturers clearly state how they have take back schemes for carpets at the end. They propose different adhesives so that you can take them back in a more reusable way. Others, it's much more hidden. And so I think in trying to find that information, I definitely agree with those two comments, that making that information more accessible and making it compulsory is part of this process. If that information was easier to access for people, then you could immediately discount the information, and it would force people to then have to declare that, because if they're not declaring it, why not when everyone else is?
Okay, thank you for that, Jenny. I think we've got to wrap up now. What I want to do is to thank Richard Boyd, Gilly Hobbs, Pablo van der Bosch, Elmer Dermot, oh no, I was going to say your name probably disappeared from me, Demisovic, and others. It's quite a lot of Daves involved as well. And I don't know if I said Richard, but thank you very much, everybody. And I'm going to hand over to Lauren now.
Brill, thank you so much, Duncan. Just before I do the wrap-ups, do you also want to tell people about your summer school?
Well, I do, but it was under your name, so I thought you were going to do it on my behalf.
No, you do it now.
Can I do it? Can I do it?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I've been working on an Interreg project with Rota, who everybody seems to know, and Bellestock, who are based in Paris, and others. And the research project is 3 years long and involving across 6 countries in Northern Europe. And the output from this research project is going to be a directory of suppliers, 1,500 organizations who are dealing with the deconstruction of buildings, but more crucially, the introduction of those elements into new build projects. So that's an amazing directory, some case studies, and also a roadmap for clients who own estates of buildings to enable them to understand the potentials of reuse their building stock. And already, if you go to the F for Freddie CRBE website, there are published outputs which are easily read. My role in all of this is to curate and host something we've called the School of Reconstruction, which should have happened in the real world, as it were, last year, but is going to be a digital summer school, first 2 weeks of August the 2nd to August the 13th. We have over 80 students from around the world who've all said they're going to take part. They all sent motivational statements, and it's very exciting that they've all been selected. But we are looking for team leaders. So we're looking for people who might want to run a team of 8 to 10 students. It will all be done this way. It will all be done digitally. And so you don't have to be an architect or a designer. We've got a lot of those involved. Rota are running a team. A number of other people are running teams. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing a call out for team leaders, and please just contact me directly. That's Duncan Baker Brown. You can find me various links on the interweb. Yeah, if you want to be a team leader, if you're interested, there's the School of Reconstruction website in the chat. Thank you very much, Lauren.
Brilliant. That was very succinct, and you did a much better explanation than I ever could. Very quickly, before we all go to the Hope and Action, the ACAN virtual pub, I've got a couple of ACAN announcements. We've got an open meeting on the 1st of June, and then we have a Retro First event on the 10th of June, which is being run by the Existing Buildings thematic group. I have to say thank you so much to all of our speakers and experts and breakout room leaders, whatever we're calling you all. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and also contributing to the series as well. This series is only as good as you guys, and it's been absolutely amazing. All of the previous series are up on the ACAN YouTube channel. They're free and available to watch. We've already had over 2,000 views on our stage 0, which is insane. Parts of this event this evening as well will be cut and produced and put on YouTube as well. So please do check that out when it's online. Shout out to all of you guys who came. Like, it's been absolutely amazing. The breakout rooms were hugely valuable, and this event series has basically relied on your participation and input and wonderful questions. It's now kind of our job at ACAN and ACAN CE to process all of the information that we've got. We've got a huge wealth of notes and recordings and Miro board content that we're going to try and summarize and issue as kind of PDF one pages that go with each of the YouTube channels possibly. So stay tuned for that. Of course, if you feel inspired to join the ACAN Circular Economy thematic group, please do. You should come and join us in the pub, the virtual pub, which will be on a separate Zoom link that we'll join now. And they don't know I'm going to do this, but a huge shout out to ACAN CE. The group of people behind this event series have worked so hard. I mean, given countless lunch breaks to organising this, and it wouldn't have been what it was without all of you guys. So huge thank you to them, and see you all in the pub, hopefully.